My daughters told me I wasn't their real father, so I stopped acting like one, but they didn't expect the consequences. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished another long day at work and was looking forward to a quiet evening. The house was eerily quiet when I walked in. Something felt off. My wife was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes glued to her phone, and the girls were nowhere to be seen. The moment I put down my briefcase, my wife looked at me, her face tense with something I couldn't place. "Where are the girls?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She didn't answer immediately, just looked at her phone again, her fingers scrolling aimlessly. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of muffled voices coming from the back of the house. It was strange because the back door was supposed to be locked. I walked toward the sound without thinking anything of it at first, but as I walked into the hallway, I saw my girls through the open living room door. They were sitting on the couch with their heads close together. I couldn't hear everything, but the words I did catch made my stomach turn. "We don't even have to call Dad," one of them said. "He's not our real father. I can't believe Mom married him." The words hit me like a slap. My breath caught in my throat and I froze. How could they think that? I'd raised them from the moment they were born. I'd been there for every scraped knee, every school play, every late-night homework session. I was their father, whether they admitted it or not. I should have walked in and confronted them right then, but something inside me told me to hold back. It was as if a wave of confusion and grief had hit me, and I needed a moment to figure out what was going on. I backed away silently, but my heart pounded in my chest. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. The girls were distant, almost cold. They didn't look me in the eye, didn't ask about my day, or even speak to me unless they had to. My wife didn't mention it either. She just sat there silently, sipping her wine, never meeting my gaze. That night, I lay awake long after everyone else had gone to bed. The words echoed in my mind. "He's not our real father." How could they think that? What did I miss? I replayed every moment, every interaction with the girls. I'd always tried to do what was best for them, to be present, to be the father figure they needed after their biological father had disappeared from the picture. The next morning, I woke early. My wife was still asleep, but the girls were already up, huddled over their phones at the kitchen table. The tension in the air was palpable. This wasn't how things had been before. There was a coldness between us that hadn't been there just a few days ago. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed to understand why they felt this way. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I asked them, "Do you two think I'm not your father?" They didn't even look at me. One of them mumbled, "You're not. You never really were." I felt like the air had been sucked out of my chest. It was like I was listening to it in slow motion, my heart pounding with every word. They didn't even seem to care that they were tearing me apart. I stood there staring at them, trying to process what had just happened. They weren't upset, they weren't crying, they weren't even angry. They had just casually dismissed everything I'd ever done for them. "Well," I said, my voice tight, "if that's how they feel, then I guess I'm not going to act like a dad anymore." They didn't respond, their attention completely absorbed by whatever they were reading on their screens. I couldn't tell if they meant it or if it was just a gut reaction, but I said it, and the words hung in the air like an ultimatum. I turned and walked out of the room without waiting for a reply. Over the next few days, I complied. I stopped doing the little things I'd always done for them. I didn't make breakfast. I didn't remind them of their responsibilities. I didn't ask them how their day was or help them with their chores. I just stopped. I'm not sure if they noticed at first. They'd gotten so used to me doing everything for them that they probably didn't even notice what had changed. But it soon became apparent. The first time one of them looked at me in confusion was on the fourth morning. "Breakfast?" I shrugged. I don't know. You don't really need me for that, do you? She just blinked at me, seeming more confused than angry, but the next day she didn't ask again. By the end of the week, the atmosphere in the house had changed. It wasn't just the girls who were restless. My wife was too. She noticed the change. She noticed that I wasn't doing the extra work anymore, that I wasn't jumping in to help when things went wrong. One afternoon she asked, "Why are you being like this? Why aren't you looking after them?" I didn't even look up from the television. I'm not their father anymore. They don't want me to be, so why should I pretend? Their silence said it all. I didn't know how to respond. It wasn't what I had hoped for, but I wasn't going to apologize, not this time. As the days passed, the girls began to show signs of discomfort. They seemed to understand what had happened. They didn't understand why I wasn't playing the role they expected. It was as if they didn't realize how much I had done for them until I was no longer there. And that's when things began to change. It started subtly at first. A few glances exchanged between my wife and the girls, but nothing more. They still walked past me in the hallway without a word, as if I were just another piece of furniture in the house. The house had become a shell of its former self, devoid of any warmth or laughter. It was a stark difference from the way things used to be. But I had my reasons for keeping my distance. They'd drawn their line in the sand when they told me I wasn't their real father, and I wasn't going to cross her anymore. Then, one afternoon, the tension finally exploded. The girls had been particularly withdrawn that day. They ate dinner without speaking, their eyes glued to their plates, as if the food had somehow become more interesting than the family sitting around the table. I could feel the unspoken words hanging in the air, like an argument waiting to happen. After dinner, one of the girls finally spoke. "Why aren't you helping anymore?" Her voice was small, almost unsure, but it held an edge I couldn't ignore. I didn't look up from my book. They didn't want me to help them. She shook her head, her brow furrowed. "That's not what we meant. We didn't think you'd stop being there for us." "Maybe you should have thought of that before telling me I wasn't their father," I said, my voice cold. The words hit like a punch. Her face twisted in confusion, as if she didn't fully understand how things had gotten this far. "But we didn't say it at that sense. We just—" "What?" I interrupted. "They were just angry. They didn't think about how it would feel to hear that dismissed as if I were a stranger." The room went silent. She opened her mouth and then closed it again, unsure of what to say. It was as if the reality of his words had finally hit her. I wasn't a stranger. I had been there for her, for both of them, when they needed a father. And now they were starting to realize it. My wife, who had been silent until then, spoke up. "You don't have to be like this." I didn't answer her right away. I didn't know what to say. I had already given this family everything. I had sacrificed so much of my time, my energy, my love for them, and yet in an instant they had turned their backs on me. "Maybe it doesn't have to be this way, but I also don't want to pretend like nothing has happened. They all made it clear what my place is in this house. I'm just the guy who brings in the paycheck and fixes things around here, right?" My wife looked at me. Her face softened for a moment, but I wasn't in the mood for her sympathy. I wasn't looking for an apology. I just needed them to understand what it felt like to be left out. The next few days were an odd mix of tension and understanding. The girls began to notice that their mother was no longer intervening. She wasn't the buffer between us. She wasn't trying to smooth things over like she used to, and that seemed to hit them harder than I expected. They were used to the comfortable routine we'd built, one in which I played the role of parent, provider, fixer, and now that I wasn't playing that role, everything felt off balance. My absence, my unwillingness to participate, had created a void they were struggling to fill. By the end of the week, I'd stopped doing everything I used to. I wasn't making their lunches, reminding them to take their vitamins, fixing their broken toys, or answering their questions about school. I barely looked at them when they talked. If they wanted a parent, they can find one. One night I was sitting in the living room when the youngest one came in. Hesitating before sitting next to me, her eyes were lowered, her hands twisting nervously. "Dad, can we talk?" I didn't look at her right away. "About what?" "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean what I said. We didn't mean it. We just, I don't know. I didn't think it would hurt you." I let the silence stretch between us. I could feel the weight of her words, but part of me was still angry. I wanted to believe her, but I didn't know if I could just forgive and forget. What if she was only saying the words because it was getting awkward? I turned the page in my book, pretending I hadn't heard her. "You should have thought of that before." Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment I thought she might cry, but she didn't. She just sat there staring at the floor, her face pale and tight with regret. I could see the guilt etched into her features, and for a second I almost felt sorry for her. But then a voice in my head told me this was exactly what she had wanted. This was the consequence of her actions. It wasn't until the next day that the full impact of my silence began to sink in. My wife came to me with frustration written all over her face. "You've already made your point. Why are you punishing them like this?" "I'm not punishing them," I said, my voice calm, but my insides were a storm. "I'm giving them the space to work this out. They can't just dismiss me and expect everything to go back to normal." She looked at me for a long time, as if searching for something in my expression. Finally, she sighed. "I think they realize what they've done. But you're making it worse. You're not being fair." I stood up suddenly, tired of the conversation. Fair. They're the ones who made this unfair in the first place. The days that followed were a blur of awkward silences, half-hearted attempts at reconciliation, and a growing sense that something was slowly breaking between us all. The girls didn't speak to me much, didn't ask for anything, didn't even try to hide their discomfort. And for the first time, I could see how deep the divide had become. It was clear they regretted their words, but it was too late to care. It wasn't until the following weekend that the change finally became undeniable. The girls who had been avoiding me like the plague for days started looking at me differently. There was a hesitation in their eyes, a recognition of the absence I'd created. They'd begun to feel what I'd been feeling all along, disconnected, unwanted, and discarded. It wasn't just the words they'd said anymore. It was the weight of their silence that had finally begun to sink in. I had no idea how long this could go on. Part of me still wanted to believe they'd realize what they'd lost, but another part of me wondered if this was the right way to go about it. Maybe they weren't ready to see it, or maybe they didn't see it at all. One Saturday, my wife asked me to accompany her to a parent-teacher conference for the youngest. I hesitated. There was still so much unsaid between us, so much tension neither of us knew how to handle. "I'll go," I said, my voice subdued. We arrived at the school, and the whole atmosphere felt strange. I hadn't been to one of these in years. My daughter sat in her seat with her shoulders hunched, her eyes darting between her mother and me, as if she were waiting for something to happen. We sat through the conference with the teacher, talking about grades, behavior, and all the usual stuff, but it wasn't the conference that unnerved me. It was the way my daughter wouldn't look at me, the way she barely acknowledged my presence. It was as if I'd become invisible. After the conference, we stood outside the school. The autumn chill bit at our skin. My wife turned to me, her face pale. "You need to talk to them," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I've talked," I replied, not meeting her eyes, "and they've made it pretty clear how they feel. They're not going to figure this out alone. You're the parent. You're supposed to lead the way." I stopped dead in my tracks. "You're supposed to lead the way. Seriously, is that what you think? Because last time I checked, they're the ones who decided I wasn't her parent. They're the ones who said, 'Not me.'" She didn't have an answer. Instead, she just looked at me like she had no idea what else to say. The car ride home was silent. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw my daughter standing by the door, looking uncomfortable and restless. It was clear they'd been waiting for us. I couldn't help but feel a pang of resentment. I walked past them without a word, going inside. The silence that followed was suffocating. But this time it was different. They followed me, floating into the living room doorway. I didn't look up from where I sat, doing my best to maintain the distance that had begun to feel like a part of me now. "Dad," the younger one said in a small voice, "can we talk?" I didn't answer immediately, but I could feel the pause there. The air between us was so thick with regret I could hardly breathe, but I wasn't going to make it easy for them. "Do you want to talk? Now," I said quietly, not bothering to look up from the TV. "What happened to all those times you told me it wasn't you, real Dad? You didn't need to talk then." The guilt on their face was unmistakable, but it didn't make me feel any better. I was tired of being the one who always had to fix things. He always had to play the father role when they didn't seem to appreciate it. "I didn't mean it," she said quietly. I was angry and confused, and I don't know why I said that. The words were sincere, but they didn't change what had happened. The damage was done, and I wasn't sure if we could ever go back to what we had before. "I know you didn't mean it," I replied, "but it still hurts. I've been trying to understand why you said it. Why would you push me away like that after everything I've done for you?" I didn't have an answer for that, and neither did her sister, who had been standing silently in the corner watching the exchange unfold. After a few moments, she spoke. "I don't know what we were thinking, Dad. I'm sorry. I really am." I looked at both of them, their faces red, their eyes wide with apologies, but even as they apologized, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too late. Too much had changed between us, and the rift was too deep. "I'm sorry. It doesn't fix everything," I said quietly. "You can't tell me I'm not your father and then expect everything to go back to normal whenever it's convenient for you." My words hung in the air, and I watched both of them shudder. I could feel the regret radiating off them, but it didn't make me feel better. It didn't take away the pain. My wife walked into the room then, standing in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. She knew what had happened, knew the toll it had taken on all of us, but she also didn't know how to fix it. The girls stood there for a few moments, their shoulders slumped, their faces a mix of shame and sadness. But it wasn't the words of apology that changed everything. It was the realization that they'd finally understood what it meant to lose someone, not just me, but the idea of family itself. And I realized for the first time that they weren't the only ones who needed to work things out. Me too. Maybe there was still a way back, but it would take more than just words. It would take time, trust, and something we'd all lost along the way: effort. "I don't know where we go from here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I need you to show me you care. Don't just say it." The younger one nodded, her face pale, but there was a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "We will," her voice small but firm. And in that moment I realized something. It wasn't just about them understanding the weight of their words. It was about me understanding how far I'd let this silence go. Maybe we could still fix this, but it would take all of us to make it work. And for the first time in days, I felt like there might be hope.